Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information and no conspiracy theories. The Windows on the World team have been out and about on the streets talking to citizen bloggers and journalists.
Hello, hi. I'm from an organisation called JENBA, which is Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association. You really need to think about the not guilty by association bit. If you go out with a group of friends and one of those people, say for example, assaults somebody else, the police are going to come, they are going to arrest everybody within that group. So you could have perhaps possibly 6 or 7 people being arrested by the police. It goes to court. The person who done the assault, yes, they are guilty, and yes, they deserve to get whatever's going to be given to them. But unfortunately, the 6 or 7 other people that are with them, they're also going to go down for that crime because they are, in fact, in the eyes of this common law, guilty by association. So you can have numerous amounts of people go into prison for the one crime that possibly the person who even done it puts their hands up and says, yes, I done it. But that doesn't matter with this common law. All of you are going to go to prison, and some obviously sometimes it's for murder cases. You'll have people like Wayne Collins-Taylor, who's been given an awful amount of time for somebody else's crime. And as a taxpayer, with the cost of prison per year in excess of £40,000, that cannot be right.
Are we wasting taxpayers' money? It actually keeps these elite in jobs. So it's actually creating jobs.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you need to think of the prison service. You know, they're privatising a lot of it. For goodness sake, how can you make a business out of a prison? The minute that all our prisons are privatised, it becomes a business. They need to fill it up. I mean, it's simple, isn't it, really? So that's another issue as well. But obviously, I'm not here to represent that here today. I'm here to represent JENBA.
Yep. And Wayne Collins-Taylor, can we find the full story online anywhere?
I believe Wayne has got a website.
Yeah, it's a website. The Free Wayne Collins-Taylor campaign. You can get on it through Facebook.
And obviously JENBA has a Facebook page as well, which is JENBA not Guilty by Association, Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association. We're a closed group, but obviously if you'd like to join, we're also on Twitter, and again JENBA has its own website. So if you'd like to get more information, we're currently representing nearly 500 cases. The majority of the cases are on our website, so I invite any listeners to go onto our website and have a look.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Our Cult of Saturn show was very popular with viewers. We recorded an extra half an hour of material with author Troy McLaughlin, who also runs the website Saturn Death Cult. Troy joins us by Skype. Welcome to Windows on the World Extra. I've been talking this evening with Jay Widener and Troy McLaughlin about the Cult of Saturn. I'm continuing my conversation now with Troy, and it's getting more fascinating by the minute. We've been talking during the break. Welcome back, Troy.
Cheers, great to be here.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I love these extra bits to the show because we can really get into some depth. Now, the Saturn cult, did the Saturn cult usurp the original teachings of these ancient religions? What's your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion is that it's actually a distortion of the Saturn cult that usurped things. It's a distortion created by people wanting to get a leg up on the rest of us. I'll give you an example. If you take probably the best known creation epic or Fall from Paradise story in Western culture, that would be the biblical story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. This story is very Saturnian in its setup, but there's a very telling moment that when Adam and Eve are ejected from the Garden of Eden and the whole thing comes crashing down, they're told that they will, by the sweat of their brow, have to make the earth yield its fruits. implying that previous to that they didn't have to do anything. There was no work required to basically feed yourself. Now, from the cosmological point of view, this points to the advent of having lost Saturn. You didn't have that warming glow from the north anymore, and the world entered into its four-season environment with the deprivations of winter and so on. Now, there's basically a bunch of people who aren't having it. Their whole thing is to get back to that lifestyle of the golden age, and they've realized that they can only do this if they get the majority of people to do the work for them and give them a nice, easy lifestyle. And what they've refined over the years is that if they can distort the legacy of what was bequeathed by Saturn, these weights and measures that the original bursting forth of light brought into the world, if they can distort that to their advantage, then they've got a free ride. And that's why it's so important for them to control institutions and systems. And they've learned that the best way to do this is to trigger those deep-seated archetypes through symbols, the use of symbols, that basically let us all believe, hey, these guys really are in charge. They're sort of destined. They've been anointed, so to speak. They've got the symbols.
That's right. There's a priest class that exists because they think they're the priest class. And a lot of this goes into bloodlines. It's interesting you're talking about the Adam and Eve story, because there is a precursor to that in Eden, which is Babylon or Iraq.
Sure.
And this goes back to the Sumerian culture, which was 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, but predates that by hundreds of thousands of years, allegedly in the Sumerian tablets, and the creation and manipulation of the gene pool of Homo sapiens sapiens. It's all very interesting. And I find the thing with this, the control system is like we can go into the depths of it and who's controlling and why, but a lot of it is down to our own coercion. We get coerced into these systems. For instance, when we're born, we have the birth certificate. We're really chattel goods of the state, and people then go, oh, it's not fair. The system isn't fair, but it has been created to appear to be fair. And this goes back really in recent times to the Roman cult. I won't call it Christianity, I'd call the Vatican Roman cult a definite arm of this Saturnian control system. And it goes back also to, you can look at the papal bulls where Pope Boniface VIII in around 1306 put the world in trust to the Holy Pontiff. So we're all owned under that system, which is incredibly Saturnian, isn't it?
Absolutely, and incredibly unbiblical. In the biblical concept of supposedly on which this is based, the world goes through a reset of all ownership every 49 years, where everything is reset and you don't get this ownership in perpetuity or all the way through as such. But yes, the Roman cult, as you refer to it, I'm quite happy to name what it is. It is the Catholic Church and the Protestant denominations that came out of the Catholic Church that we have today. The vast majority of them still adhere to that. But in Saturn Death Cult, the book I wrote, I use a term from the Bible called Nicolaitan to describe what happened in the formation of this particular manifestation of Saturn worship or distortion of Saturn worship. And the reason I do that is there's a part in Revelation that predicts the arrival of a people called the Nicolaitans, who apparently are hated by God because of what they do. And essentially, research tells me that the Nicolaitans effectively are a professional priest class. And wherever you get a professional priest class, you get basically a mechanism for control over the majority of people because of this doomsday anxiety. These people have the keys to escaping doomsday, whether it's doomsday in your individual life or doomsday in your nation's life or whatever. These are the guys who have that control. But yes, in Saturn Death Cult, the ecclesiastical phase of what I would call the Saturn Death Cult, starting from about 600 BC through to literally the 1880s. You could go so far. I actually put it to the point when Napoleon grabbed the crown. People dispute this, but supposedly grabbed the crown from the Pope and crowned himself when he was crowned Holy Roman Empire, thus divorcing Europe from the control. But that was the ecclesiastical phase of this whole Saturnian-based system of control. I name them Nicolaitans, professional priests.
That's very interesting, because this assumption of a priest class goes through every part of our society. Look at your local council, for instance. It's all there. And what happens is people buy into it at a lower level, then they want to be part of it, but they're merely serving a control system which they don't understand fully, but they feel as though they're part of, and that's part of the problem, because people will then feel this kind of power trip, and you see it all the time. You see it in every walk of life, especially now. We've even got private police forces, but all of this is to do with the black cloak of Saturn, the control. That's why the police wear black. That's why you go into a court and the ushers and the magistrates will be wearing black. Magistrates' courts are not quite as revealing as that, but certainly the higher levels and the higher courts are. And of course, you've got the 3 tiers of the benches, the first 3 levels of Freemasonry, which is basically just where people get initiated into something that they think is going to give them knowledge. But once they're initiated into that knowledge, they have to say goodbye to their old selves, which is another form of massive mind control. So it works at every level. And what's fascinating about this cult of Saturn is that people actually appear to want to be mind controlled to a certain degree. There seems to be something within the human race that doesn't actually want to resist this. And that's what I find very, very puzzling, because for years I've been trying to find out who I am, where we came from, what's it all about, who's really in control. But the vast majority of people, even though they're very busy, they're kept on a hamster wheel. A lot of the time their eyes glaze over when we go on about this stuff. Hopefully there's more and more people waking up to it. But again, it's this lack of knowledge of what is actually ruling us. And as we said earlier, this cult of Saturn seems to flow through everything. It flows through every control system on the planet.
Indeed, that sort of psychosis that you talk about, people being subservient to the system. Again, I put it back to the deepest rooted archetype after the creator God, father figure, that humanity has, is this fear of doomsday. And we look for a savior. We look for somebody to protect us from another thing. And really the distortions, and Jay Widener previously alluded to some of the more horrific examples of where these distortions have taken us. Ritualistic slaughter, sacrifice, vast counts of pedophilia, all this sort of stuff. It's all been done to appease a creator God who turned very destructive and brought doomsday down on us. And essentially what we're doing is signing over. We're saying to these people at a subconscious level, you look after us, you take the reins, and you do the right incantations and produce the right symbols and so on like that, and everything will be fine. I'll be safe. But it's like Benjamin Franklin said, if you put safety above liberty, you'll lose both.
That's right. And of course, you go to confession to confess your sins to a third party. It's never to the greater whole, is it? This is where natural law comes in, which I think is the solution to all this stuff. If we all lived under natural law, these dark forces wouldn't take control of people and their lives, because natural law just means that you would do as you would want to be done by, and you follow basic rules that are inherently there. Once you break down all this control system and look into what it's really about, you start seeing the only way of actually usurping that system or getting out of it is by being completely open and honest about everything. Then transactions will become easier, more fulfilling and better, and then you will remove the need for obfuscation and deception.
Yeah, there's a universal understanding amongst all the major religions that you can if you go into looking at these religions and so on, you get some nuggets of truth because, as we know, the best lies are based on a half truth. And one of the profound laws that are propagated by these religions that could be used in that sense is that you shall have no diverse weights and measures. And of course, the other one is you will not introduce interest as part of your money system, as your way of lending to each other. So essentially within, and that can be found in all the religions. It's not just a straightforward Judeo-Christian Islam type construct. What it's basically saying is that whoever you are, from perceived lowest to perceived highest, you've got to have trust in the system of measurements and weights that you're entering into an agreement over. And I would go so far as to say that the Great Pyramid really functioned on that level when it was first created. It enshrined a benchmark for people to refer to so that they could always go back to something and get the correct measure, so that wherever you had disputes, you had something that you could refer to, the law, so to speak. But we live in a world now where the law is simply defined by whatever bureaucracy decides it is on the day, and we're slipping ever more down that slippery slope. And that's very much part of the distortion of the original sort of understanding of Saturn that I argue in Saturn Death Cult has taken place.
Yeah, it's this administrative system that assumes authority, and it's more and more out of control. We see it all the time. You see it with basically the courts and the police and local authorities, people in public office are now nearly wholly corrupt. And what they do all the time is lie. And we've discussed this a lot on this program. So you've got a police force who do not follow natural law, who are totally corrupted. You've got public servants who are exactly the same. You've got a government which just reads off an auto cue, and they're run by international banking interests. Now, it's very interesting that you mentioned all that, because the Knights Templar introduced the promissory note and usury. And if you look at their Saturn is the number 8 numerologically, and the 8 is always trying to come down to earth. It's chasing its tail constantly, so it brings sparks down to earth. And there's this kind of material spiritual war going on within the 8 all the time. And if you look at the banks in the City of London, and we've just discussed this on the show, that the base of columns there is the octagon. The bank door handles are octagon shaped. And this all goes to the Templars, because if you look at the octagon shape and put that cross in the middle, then that is the Templar symbol. That red cross has become usurped and used as this monetary power. You look at the Swiss flag, but if you look at the cult of octagon and you basically look at the Knights Templar sign, then imagine the American stop sign and put that cross in it, and all that you've done is join the sides together, and you've got that figure of 8. Yeah.
Well, this concept, a financial system based on interest or usury is probably the most insidious of all the control mechanisms that can be traced back to Saturn. I trace it as far back as Babylon, where the gold standard was first established, and then so on to the debt-based financial system that we have today. But if people can understand that if you give somebody the power to print $10, and those are the only $10 in the entire world, 10 pounds here in the UK, whatever it is, and that person can say to you, at the end of the year, I want 11 back, but there are only $10 in existence, and you can't pay that $11th back, and so on. And then that person who printed it and gave it to you says, oh, okay, now I have the right to take your stuff. All right. Then if you can understand that that is essentially what the central banking model is today. That's what all our national debt is. That's what we fight wars over, the whole works. It is the most insidious form of control. It beats the ecclesiastical model. It beats the military model, hands down, for hoodwinking us and conning us into, into basically fighting amongst ourselves for that non-existent $11th dollar.
That's exactly right, and that you've summed up exactly how the banking system works and the system of usury. This all also goes back to natural law and the fact that that wouldn't be allowed if we were doing financial transactions between ourselves. It's only when third parties come in and take over that this happens, and that's where the influence lies. It's very interesting, all that, because when you look at it, there's always a third party there, isn't there? You know, it like the ancient laws where law actually had to be spoken. It could only be spoken. Natural law can only be spoken. If you write it down, it can be changed. It can be misinterpreted. So the law had to be done eye to eye, face to face. And then, of course, this Roman cult in recent times came along and usurped that with their brilliant system of administration. They could track where anything was in the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And it's this obsession that's very Saturnian, because it's this obsession with detail, bureaucracy, procedure that we see all around us. And that is the major frustration in people's lives, isn't it?
Very much so. I think, you know, when we saw the Arab Spring blow up originally in Tunisia, that guy who burned himself didn't do it because he wanted a vote. He did it because he simply wasn't allowed by bureaucracy to have a license to sell apples on the side of the road, or fruit, or whatever it is he wanted. He was totally subverted by this idea. Now, the original, I would go so far as to say, is that the original Golden Age Saturn concept is that having bequeathed measures, weights and measures, the concept of weights and measures on the human race, that all that's needed for two people to get along and get involved in the deal is an agreement on what the weights and measures will be that define that deal. What the Saturnian distortion, this Saturn cult in its various forms has created, is they have placed that third party, instead of that third party being the agreement of what weights and measures we use, that third party becomes a third person with their own agenda. And basically the Saturn cult has positioned itself in its various forms to take that position. And, you know, it's frustrating because we don't need them. You know, the only time a third person should get involved in anything between two people in a deal is if that comes into dispute. And then all that is to witness who's got the correct interpretation of whatever weights and measures were used in making that deal.
Very good analogy, that, because we covered that recently in its most extreme form, where the police and private bailiff companies are actually working together. So you've got three parties there.
Yeah.
You've got basically the debtor or the assumed debtor, you've got the bailiff, and you've got the police. Now, the police and the bailiffs are working together as privateers to steal property. So in other words, there isn't even a third party there anymore. So the system's broken down to that extent. And once it becomes corrupted, it has to change. The way we're going to change it is to start relying on our own natural law and keep Saturn out of the equation.
Yeah.
Would you just like to round up, Troy, because we're nearly out of time?
Okay, well, basically, you know, Saturn and its role is outlined in my book, Saturn Death Cult. I have a website, saturndeathcult.com. If people want to look at both the cosmological explanation, that's the natural history, they can go to that and also carry on to read how things have been distorted into the modern, particularly the financial system that we have today. But I would urge everybody to understand that really the cult of Saturn is based on a mythology that originally was a record of catastrophic planetary events that scarred the human race. And essentially we have a bunch of people taking advantage of that today.
That's brilliant, Troy. Will you come on the show again?
I certainly will.
Thanks for joining us on Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World. We'll see you soon.